said, well, it's not like I'm going to be
I don't
absolutely
know. I'm stuck.
In a way, for a Disney movie, it was kind of
The movie made them very nervous, obviously.
Welcome, everyone, to the Envelope Animation Roundtable. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I thought we'd start at the beginning, which is the pitch. Your experience getting your movie made. I know, Jorge, you have kind of a funny pitch experience when you were explaining your movie to Guillermo del Toro. Could you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
So the studio that first got involved was Real Effects, and there was somebody there who knew Guillermo. And later I found out that I pitched the movie to him 5 times, and he had said no. He was just so busy. Eventually, I guess he felt really bad for me. He said, okay, I'll come to my house and pitch it to me one last time so I can say no to you in your face. And so we go over there, we bring all the stuff, and it was one of the worst pitches of all time in the history of pitches. We set up all the stuff. It was like 110 degrees in his house. He was miserable because it was so hot, and I sweat a lot, so I was drenched. And it was right outside his pool area, and so he had like a life-size statue of Ray Harryhausen made out of bronze that I could swear was judging me the whole time, just staring at me. And so as soon as I opened my mouth to pitch, they had told me, you have 20 minutes to pitch him, and he goes, no, you have 5 minutes to pitch me. So the words start coming out of my mouth, and my people in the house next door betray me, and there must have been like 5 lawnmower guys and leaf blower guys, and all at the same time, super loud. And so I look at Guillermo like, we should wait for them to finish. He goes, no, keep going. So I start pitching him, and it's a very heartfelt movie, so I'm yelling all this stuff, like, and then he proposes in all his heart. And so by the end of it, it was a mess, and we go back and we sit down, and he goes, that was one of the worst pitches I've ever seen. So I'm ready to just shake his hand and get out of there, and he goes, but I see magic here. I know who you are, I know you're cartoon, so of course I want to produce your movie. But he put me through the ringer.
Wow. So it really just sticking
wonder if
it.
he orchestrated all the leaf blowers and the lawnmowers just to put you
Like
through
an obstacle course.
Yeah.
Has anybody else ever had a pitch that went completely awry?
I think we probably all have. Yeah. If you've spent any time, in story at all, you've bombed. Yeah, you have to have bombed. And then they're all, you always run that risk, and you just got to take it as it comes, because that's part of the territory.
Well, I know at Disney you're encouraged to pitch multiple ideas at once, right? And what's the thinking there?
Well, it's something I think John started up at Pixar, where he doesn't want you to kind of put all your emotional eggs in one basket and just be like, this is the only thing that I can see making. I think he likes you to think a little broader than that, and the task of trying to put together 3, it makes you automatically kind of divert your focus into different things, and I think he's found that over the years that there's always one that kind of pops up that as the one that will be, that sparks his interest and he feels like is the one to go forward with. And for Big Hero 6, I think I pitched maybe 6 or 7. It was more than 3. And Big Hero being probably the, if you look around the room, our story rooms, I'd put more work into. As I pitched him around the room, Big Hero's over here. It was the last one I pitched, and I put the least amount of work into. As far as thinking about what we would do with it, just had a very basic pitch. There was very little art. I don't think we did any artwork for it, and it was the last one. But that was the one that I think for him had the emotional center that he felt compelled with.
And did you, at that point, you were encouraged to pitch Marvel properties specifically, right? Or was that one of many other Marvel properties? Or?
Yeah. Because I had a 5-minute conversation with John. He had heard that I was interested in maybe doing something with the Marvel thing, and I said, I think I loved Marvel Comics as a kid. I loved Disney Animation as a kid. What if we could mash those things up? He got very excited. I got very excited, and he said, go find something. I mean, it was literally that simple. And so I just spent a while putting lists together of things that I thought would be good, and based on my own childhood, but also just kind of going into their, they have a pretty amazing sort of wiki page that gives all their characters and all the, the bios on their characters and where they've appeared and that kind of thing. And I found Big Hero 6 there. It was the title that attracted me. I thought it sounded cool. And then I thought, Japanese superhero team, that's super awesome. And I bought the books, and so from there it kind of spun.
Now, I know, Dean, when you signed on to do How to Train Your Dragon 2, it was specifically with the idea that you would get to do a trilogy. Why was that important to you?
Because I think a lot of sequels feel unnecessary, and they tend to recycle material, and a lot of them feel like cash grabs. So to me, it felt like if these things take 3 or 4 years to make, if we're going to invest the time in it, it would be nice to have it feel as though it's got a sense of purpose. And so I pitched the idea of the first movie being a first act in a 3-act story. And the second film would be the meat of Hiccup's coming of age, but then everything would culminate in a very finite, conclusive way with a third installment. And they bought into that because it meant that we could actually develop storylines. Some things that were left unexplained in the first film could take on more importance, but also set up things that must transpire in the third.
Makes sense. I know, Chris, with the Lego movie that's also sort of evolving into other films, spin-off films. Did you envision that when you first came on?
Oh, no.
No?
Not at all. I mean, the fact that it got made at all is kind of a miracle. I mean, they approached us about doing a Lego movie, and we said, no, thank you, originally. Sort of the opposite version of a pitch. Because of the soulish cash grab fear, without it being a sequel already. But then, of course, we went home and started thinking about like those little brick films that people make online, little stop-motion shorts that people make in their basements and post onto YouTube, and they're so clever and have so much creativity. And we thought, well, maybe there's a way to do it that doesn't feel like a giant commercial. And so then we sent an email saying, we still don't want to do it, but if you did it, this is how we would do it. And we sort of beat out a simple story. But we didn't want to consider it. But then Dan Lin, the producer, who had been working with the Lego group, went and hired someone else to write an outline. They wrote an outline. They pitched it to the Lego group, and they didn't like it. And then he said, well, wait, hold on, I've got another idea. Hold on over here. And he found on his BlackBerry the email we had sent him. And they loved that storyline, and so that was what they were going to be willing to make a movie out of. And so then they came back to us saying, hey, would you like to do that? And so then we're like, okay, we'll write something, but we won't really direct it. But then as soon as we started writing it, we fell in love with it and saw the potential that it could have and how special it could be. And so that's how. But when we started, there's no concept that it was going to become anything more than just like a one-off crazy little experiment.
Right.
To try and see if we could get away with it.
And did Lego have much input as you were making the film?
No, they actually, well, part of our pitch to them was, if this is going to work, you guys, it can't be coming from the Lego group and it can't be coming from Warner Brothers. It has to feel like it's a grassroots thing that's coming from a team of filmmakers, like all of us in the building in Santa Monica and then Australia. And if it feels like, the hand of the Lego group is there going like, sell these toys, then it would just be a disaster. And so they understood that and respected it. And the movie made them very nervous, obviously, because it's sort of gently nibbling at the hand that feeds it. But they were pretty respectful. We would show them cuts, and we would actually get their help on design work because we had a great team that would design these cool things, but then they would say, that's great, but it's not very structurally sound. If you actually built that, it would fall apart immediately. And so then they would come and rebuild it with they have some amazing designers. So that was really helpful. But they were pretty hands-off, which was an amazing experience for us.
And did DC have anything to say about what you did with the Batman character?
So we ran, we met with Zack Snyder and we met with Nolan's team about making sure that we were not treading over any of the same ground. And then we just wrote a bunch of stuff, and with no regard as to how possible it was or anything. And the only stuff that made anybody uncomfortable was we had was the Green Lantern character that people thought was maybe a little bit too soon. And then we had a Justice League scene where they were starting to form a Justice League until Green Lantern came along. They decided not to, and they decided that was not a good idea, and so we cut that from the movie pretty late in the process, actually. And this was before any of the recent announcements came out, so they're like, we can't really talk about it, but there's this scene, and we kind of think that it can't be in the movie.
Right.
But other than that, again, they were completely hands off. No one came in and said, "Oh, Batman wouldn't do that."
Right.
So we were very lucky.
You got away with a lot.
We did get away with a lot.
Sneaky.
Lack of supervision is the best, you guys. Negligence.
Do you find that ever though, that like the less the studio is paying attention to your movie sometimes, the more kind of freedom or flexibility you have? Dean, you're nodding. Is that?
Well, we had that experience on Lilo and Stitch. And Chris Sanders and I went off to make what was considered a B budget movie with a decreased production time to make it, and the condition was that we went to Orlando, Florida to make it. So there was a studio there that needed a feature film of its own, and it largely kept us off the radar. So I think that, in a way, for a Disney movie, it was kind of subversive for the time, and we had a lot of creative liberty, but it came from the fact that they were spending less money and it would take less time to make.
I wonder sometimes if there's a virtue also in being outside Los Angeles, and I'm thinking about Leica, Graham. Do you think that the fact that you guys are kind of far away ever helps in your creative process?
Definitely. I think everyone sees it in the movies we make. There's a lot of Portland that kind of creeps into those movies. It's just part of the culture and sort of the eclectic mix of people up there. And it's funny thinking of like studio intervention. I mean, we're in a weird, unique spot in that we really kind of have Travis Knight to deal with, but we don't really have much beyond that, so we kind of work fairly closely with Travis. And for the most part, I mean, I've worked as a story artist on Coraline, Paranorman, and now the Boxtrolls, and we're kind of mostly left our own devices, but every now and again Travis will step in and say, you know, you need this or that. And I specifically remember on the Boxtrolls we had, in one of the early iterations, we had this great fish out of water sequence with eggs, our main character, and he was at a tea party with Winnie's parents, and it really worked great. And it was one of the few things in those early screenings that for the studio was working great. Everybody agreed it was a really good scene, but as the movie began to evolve, Travis came in at a certain point and said, you guys, much as we all love it, we need to rework, make that moment bigger. It has to be a bigger moment. It just needs to, for the whole film, it needs to balance it a little better. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with, Tony and I thought, really clever idea of doing a whole big ballroom dancing scene, which ultimately became the absolute hardest thing we had to do in the movie. But we didn't know that. Neither Tony and I were really sort of stop motion guys at heart, so we didn't quite recognize the logistical pain it was going to cause in all the departments. But it was what Travis had sort of pushed us into doing. So it was one of those moments where it was kind of nice that he had sort of seen it from a big picture perspective, because we were so in the trenches of the story. And that moment became something really special because of that.
Did you ever have a moment where your crew said, look, guys, cool idea, we can't do that?
To their credit, they've never sort of said that to our faces.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of those moments. Yeah, there's, you know, you hear a little bit
Conversations
around the water cooler.
Nobody wants to be that person, I think.
That dance sequence was one of those moments where, you know, as I'm sure you guys do in your process, we have those sequence breakdown meetings, and that's when all the heads of the departments get together in a room and we go shot by shot, and everybody divvies up the workload, who's going to do what. And those meetings are always, can be contentious or whatever, but there's always a lot of energy. Everybody's amped up to kind of, they've all done their homework coming into the room. They know how they're going to attack certain problems and how they're going to. We have a real bizarre setup too, where because we're this stop motion studio, we've got this mix of futurists and Luddites all together sharing the same parking lot, and it is always a bit of a, you know, it's friendly, but it is a bit of a competitive thing as whether it's going to be practical or whether it's going to be digital. It all has to fit. Whatever's going to fit the style of the film usually wins. Anyway, there's always a little bit of battling. Usually, yeah, the room's kind of buzzing when you walk in, but when we walked in for the breakdown for the dance sequence, it's dead silent. Nobody was talking. No one would even make eye contact with Tony and I when we came in. So that was the first and only real moment in it where, as directors, we thought, oh, maybe we may have overstepped our boundaries here. Maybe we can't pull this off.
Right.
But again, everybody just hunkered down. We began to just step through it methodically, and we got to an end result. I mean, it took all 18 months of the shooting schedule to get like a little less than 2 minutes of footage done, but I think, you know, it was all worth it when you look at it now.
I think that's a common thing in animation, is like anytime, nobody wants to be that person to say no. You know, everybody loves the challenge, and I know it's that case at our studio as well. That you know, they'll tell us if it's going to be difficult, but they'll generally never say we can't do it. It's a lot of times it's like, okay, give us a minute to figure it out, but we'll get it done. You know, and it's I think that's just a that's kind of like everybody in animation. They just want to do the best job they can and put the best story up on film.
They'll ask you if it's important to you because
Exactly.
Like, is it really important that
How
it's at night
important?
because the light is going to be
Right.
much harder to execute? And you say, yeah, it's really important. And they say, okay, fine. And then
We won't see our families for 4 months, but okay.
But yeah, Hiro can ruffle his hair.
We'll give you that hair.
Yeah, we'll give you that. Jorge, did you have that experience? I mean, you were asking the animators to do these very intricate, really different characters. Did they ever?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that as a lover of animation, I would see the characters get really watered down by the time they got to the movie. And the more I researched it, the more I realized every department has a head that goes, well, that's too hard to model. Let's model it so it's easier to light. And so, but every department has their say. And by
Do
the
you mean
end
like
of it,
visually watered down, like
Yeah.
from your original sketches?
from when I would see stuff, and I would see, wow, now this is a character that's perfect to animate, perfect to light, perfect to texture, perfect to model, but it's super weak sauce design-wise because it's every department has had their say. So as the characters designer of the movie and as a director, I got to say like a tank, like no, like all the bullets would come, like that's gonna be impossible to light, that's gonna be impossible to model, and I challenged and I kind of challenged every team. I said, let's pretend we're stop motion and someone just handed you the puppet and you're the animator. How the hell are you gonna move it? See you tomorrow. Like this is your challenge to you guys. And if people can do it in the real world, then we can certainly do it in the computer. And same thing with the designs. In the beginning, we had all these designs, and a lot of the CG guys would go, "This is impossible. You can't have this much detail. You can't make these characters." So our production designer went to El Salvador. He took all the drawings, no turnarounds, nothing, just drawings. Got a bunch of artisans. They built all the maquettes, brought them back to Texas, and we said, if people can build this in the real world, you can build it in the computer. And so that became the look of the movie.
That's so interesting. There's this idea in psychology, something called decision fatigue, which is something that doctors have, judges have, and it's basically the more decisions you make in a day, by the end of the day, you're making worse decisions. And I thought to myself, if anybody in Hollywood could potentially get decision fatigue, it would be animation directors. 'Cause you guys don't get anything for free. Is there ever a point where you just think, I don't know, I'm stuck creatively, or I've just had too much input today? Dean, you're nodding. Is that something you?
Yeah, it's an everyday thing, where the nice thing about How to Train Your Dragon 2 is we were a bit of a well-greased wheel coming off of the first film, and we had really strong artists in charge of their departments. And because I was writing solo and I was going to be directing solo, I empowered those people around me to say, you can reign dominion over your department, and you can make a lot of the creative decisions, and I'll support you unless I absolutely disagree, and it comes down to that sort of how much do you care? But I think everyone was looking to me to govern the story, and that's a tough enough job in itself. So I made it a priority number one to surround myself with people who do their jobs exceedingly well, far better than I could ever do them, and then just empower them to help out on that level and to help me on the story side too, because it was a very open forum. So if anyone felt a scene was weak or a character was weak or some dialogue wasn't working, I encouraged them to tell me. I'd rather hear it from them than hear it when it's too late.
yeah.
How do you create an environment where people feel like they can speak up when something's not working? I mean, I know that's something you guys talk about a lot at Disney.
Yeah, from the first meeting, I guess you just make it very clear that and ask. I think that's important at the beginning, is to make sure you're asking them and try and pull it out of them, because sometimes they may not be as forthcoming unless you ask. And then once you do that, and once they understand that, oh, that's what's expected of me, I'm supposed to have an opinion. And give feedback, then you can back off on the questions a little bit, and then it'll just be sort of the norm. And it comes out of being a story. That's what our story rooms are like. Where story rooms, you don't have to pull feedback out of anybody. at all. It's kind of the opposite.
But you said it wasn't always that way. You guys had to be encouraged to be a little bit.
Yeah, for our story trust, for sure. Yeah, like when John and Ed first came, we were giving feedback on each other's stories, but we were being very nice about it and polite. And if John didn't give a note and we had a note that he didn't express, or maybe was counter to a John note or something like that, we held it back. And they noticed that, to their credit. John and Ed noticed that very early on and sat us all down and basically laid down the law and said, that's not how we do things at Pixar. That's not how we're going to do things here in our story trust. Open and honest communication at all times. And so that's all it took. It was one meeting and one little discussion from those guys, and we changed our sort of dynamic and how we deal with each other. And now it's absolute honesty. There's no egos. It's all about how we can make this film stronger.
Right, and that's what's great about animation is it's such a slow, drawn-out process. There's time for everybody to debate, and not just the story team, but every part of the department, and PAs can chime in and say, I think that this, and whereas like in live action, you're burning daylight and you've got to shoot the thing, and like we only have so many hours to get this done. But in animation, it's just years of being able to go back over it and over it and over it again and keep making changes. And so I think that's part of the reason why the movies turn out, I think, better from a percentage standpoint.
Is there such a thing as too much time?
For sure, and like that same kind of fatigue where you've seen a moment and it was really emotional or it was really funny the first time and the 7th time and the 20th time, and now you're numb to it and you don't feel anything. It's not funny anymore.
You got to protect it. It feels like you got to protect those moments.
You have to remember when this used to make us laugh? That was delightful. And then it's good to bring in fresh eyes and audiences and just people that you trust to come in and be like, does this work? Because you get just numb to the process. It's so long.
Right. Yeah. How do you stay fresh about your own movie?
I mean, I feel like for my experience, it was the first time directing anything. Having a co-director was a huge benefit. I mean, Tony had more experience. He'd done a film. But it was that ability for each of us to kind of pull the other one up when you do get decision fatigue or you're just kind of flagging on things. And it was definitely the whole way through the process was me picking up Tony some days and Tony picking me up other days. And it really helped to have that person. And like you said, Dean, just surrounding yourself with people that you can entrust to kind of help protect the idea of the story and help elevate everything that needs to get elevated is huge, because I just think there's just no one person that can truly contain all of it, even though everybody wants to think that and would love it. There's too many folks involved and there's just too many decisions to make.
I remember when Dean was at Disney and you were first directing Lilo and Stitch, I asked you, you came back from Florida and you were in the studio, and I asked you, so how it's going and what's it like, because you came from Story, and I was in Story at the time. So, I mean, what's it like directing like the animators? And Dean said, well, it's not like I'm going to tell the animators how to do their job better than they know how to do it. My job is to make sure they understand the character and understand the story point of what they're doing. And that's always stuck in my head, from going from Story into directing, because that is true. You don't have the specialized skill that these other people do, like the animators and stuff like that. So our job really is to tell the story and make sure they understand the story and the story beats and the characters' motivations and stuff, and then let them kind of do what they do best.
Right. Well, yeah, you don't go to the composer and say, I feel like we need a bassoon here to come in. You say,
that'd be awesome if that happened, because you'd be looking for a new composer probably.
Yeah, but you say, like, I want to feel inspired in this moment, and then they use the tools that they have to make it awesome.
And I think in answer to your question, like, if you know the film's going to take 3 or 4 years, what kept me motivated and excited is looking forward to every next step, because at every point you start to build your characters, and then you start to move them around, and suddenly you have your first performance tests that you light, and it starts to look like the movie, and that gets exciting. And then next thing you know, you have your first sequence of shots going into production, and you get to see those come alive. And then next thing you know, you're testing it in front of an audience. And so I kind of look forward to that in a strange way, because it's very nerve-wracking, but also it's confirmation if the jokes are playing, if it's emotional. So you have, for me anyway, there are these milestones that I look forward to. Getting to sit down with John Powell, our composer, and spot the score. And all these things kind of add up to, like, it's only another 2 months before X, and that keeps me going. And before you know it, it's like getting on a flight to New Zealand or something. You know you're going to be there for 13 hours, so you kind of look forward to the milestones along the way.
Right, the first meal, the second meal.
Movie 1, movie 2.
And each step it gets a little bit of freshness, like the actor performs it in a different way than you were expecting, and that's fun. And then, if you're open to letting animators try fun things, then they can bring new stuff to it. And every step of the way, it can be a slightly new experience for you.
Because if you keep the paint wet, everybody can kind of move it in different directions, and that's the great thing about a 3.5 or 4 year thing, is that you have time to not be too rigid in your thinking and letting everybody kind of put their own stamp on things, and you'll know if it works or if it doesn't work. But 9 times out of 10, it's gonna work and take it in a new direction that you never would have thought of.
I was kind of surprised at how pre-planned. I mean, like you, it was my first thing, so I always thought everything was super pre-planned, and I was kind of shocked by how well, we can't do that. Let's try this. And same thing with the actors. It was like, some of our actors had a hard time saying the dialogue because of their accent, so I had to do tons of rewrites all the time. Or people just improv stuff, and I was able to rewrite, oh, we're recording today. I guess we'll do a rewrite at night and then reboard it in the morning.
Or sometimes in the room.
Yeah.
An actor will bring something in the room and be like, oh, that's great, let's build on that. And next thing you know, you've got almost a new scene because of what they did. And so that's...
so I was shocked. I was like, is this how we do it?
That's how we do it,
I guess.
I guess, yeah. And it's not a linear... It's not like you do story and finish story and then go into animation.
It never ends.
No, it never ends. It just kind of is it all is intertwined and twisted together, and there's no...
Everything informs everything.
Yeah, basically the release date is when you're like, okay, we're kind of done. So.
Hands, pencils down.
Pencils down, exactly, yeah.
Is the voice actor stage a fun one for you guys? Because it strikes me as this is the one time where somebody else is creating something. Is that, Jorge, what was that stage like for you?
It was terrifying for me in the
Why is
beginning.
that?
Well, again, Guillermo, one of the first guys we recorded was Ron Perlman, and he did a number on me. He's like, Ron's going to push you around. He's going to challenge you. He's going to yell at you, and you have to stand up to him. Yeah, it's all, it's going to be like a cockfight between you two, and you have to kill him in front of everyone. So I was like, oh my God, this is going to be crazy. So I go to the recording, I'm shaking, and Ron was a sweetheart, the nicest guy in the universe.
Seems like Guillermo tries to mess with you a lot.
A lot, yeah.
You went to director boot camp, man.
Yeah, it was, but the actors, I mean, it was amazing. You think you know who the character is, and you think you know what the lines are. You think you know all these moments, but then the moment they make it their own. There was these foundation shakes during our records where we went, holy crap, this is so much better than anything we imagined. And Channing Tatum, for example, was someone that,
You guys have both worked
holy,
with that,
he's so funny. He was just, it definitely changed. I was looking forward to it, and I was really nervous, but I had no idea how creative that part of it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the only aspect of animation that has any spontaneity to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so sometimes what we'd like to do is, if they're available, if their schedules permit, we'll get actors together in the room if they have scenes and just allow them to banter and shape it and go off script if they want to. And I think every actor has a different style. Like Jay Baruchel, for example, loves to stay in Montreal. He's very much the character. Anyway, so he's much more comfortable if he can just do it via ISDN from Montreal, and show up in a t-shirt and shorts and just perform the lines. And he knows the character so well that he'll glance at the script and I'll say, okay, for this I was thinking, I got it. And could you just try? I got it. Always, he knows the direction before I can even get it out of my mouth. Whereas recording Cate Blanchett, that was kind of an intimidating experience for me.
What was that like?
Well, I've wanted to work with her since I saw her in Elizabeth, and flew down to Australia and sitting in a sound booth with her, and she wants to know everything about this character, and so she reads the lines to herself, and then she'll say, okay, now tell me the backstory, tell me what's going on, what's my subtext here, and we would really get into these conversations. I'm not sure she would say this, and maybe she should say it this way, and this doesn't roll off the tongue. And so it was they were challenging recording sessions because I had to be thinking on my feet and making alterations with her, but she felt so much more invested when we had those conversations and when we made those alterations. And she knew the character, and I just kind of had to keep in step with her.
Because that's the thing is you don't want it to be just a job for them, just to come in, punch a clock, and say these lines and then leave. That's not what's going to get you a great animated performance. You want that investment that you're talking about, and we had a similar experience, and where you let them run. You know, here's the script, and here's the storyboard. You walk them through it, but anytime you want to add anything, you know, take it and run with it. And we're very lucky to have people like T.J. Miller and Damon Wayans Jr. and Genesis, and actually all of them, to an actor, were very good at sort of improvising, and you know, that stuff is like Dean said, it's tough to get spontaneity in an animated film because of just the structure of how we make them. But that is one of the areas where you can encourage it and really get some gems.
Yeah, and we were able to get Chris Pratt, Elizabeth Banks, and Will Arnett together on 4 or 5 different occasions, and they would look forward to it because they like to play with each other, and it's so much more natural and less canned sounding. And then, you know, earlier when we did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, we would cut out breaths or things just to sort of make it feel a little bit cleaner, and then we realized it was a horrible mistake and that we should have been just embracing the sort of imperfections of it because it made it fun. Like, we even got Will Ferrell in Los Angeles and Liam Neeson in New York to do a scene together over the phone because it really is so much better when they have someone to play off of, because if you're just alone in a booth and you have to imagine everything, for an actor it's really hard. I mean, already it's hard because, you know, if you're shooting a movie and you're in a pirate ship in the rain, you show up to set and there's a pirate ship and it's raining. Right. And here you have, as the director, you have to be like, okay, you're on a pirate ship.
Close your eyes.
Close your eyes, and don't forget the rain's coming down, and then, it's rocking, and all the things that you would react to naturally in a movie aren't there. And so, you know, they have to use their imagination so much. If you can get someone else for them to play with, it's so much better.
Yeah, it made a huge difference for us because one of the early sessions we were lucky enough to get Nick Frost and Richard Iowata together in the same room for Trout and Pickles, and yeah, it's just immediate chemistry, and they, like you guys are saying, I mean, they just took the character, they riffed on things that even we weren't reading into the script lines we had written, that they just brought things out that just made it so much more fun. And it was part of the reason at the end of our film where we have that little bit at the end credits was we had so many like gold nuggets that we actually couldn't fit into the film because, you know, half of Richard Iowata's humor is that he has incredibly long pauses before he says something else. Like we were always cutting him off by accident where we thought, okay, that takes done moving, and then he says another line. It's still going. Right. And so that was an opportunity to at least use some of that like beautiful chemistry those two had, but it made all the difference that they got to start out together, figure out those characters together, and then, you know, subsequent sessions where they were on their own, they'd at least had that rhythm to kind of build, and they knew where to take it from there.
The alternative's terrible because the actor has to then sit in the booth with me, and I have to play every other character. Yeah. As I actually don't sit behind the glass. I'm always in there with the actors, so they can get immediate reaction. But I'm a terrible actor, so it's great if you can get another real actor in there where they can step on each other's lines and mess it up a bit.
I tended to read it with the actors as well, and what I liked is that it's hard for me to do both. Like I can read and I can give a little direction in there, but it's nice to have somebody in the booth actually listening with a fresh ear, I guess. Right. Because you're also trying to perform a little bit so that they have something to react to, and I'm a terrible actor as well. So you're doing the best you can to create a little bit of a scene and not step on their lines, because God forbid they say this really amazing line and your bad acting is stepping on that, you know. So, but yeah, in a perfect world, I think it would be really cool to have everybody, or as much as you can, get everybody in the room at the same time.
It's always tricky though. I mean,
with
all the
schedules
actors,
are
their
hard.
schedules are always crazy, and to get
it takes years. So
so when it happens, you really want to make use of that session and have it go well.
Dean, hearing you talk about Cate Blanchett's character, she's such an interesting character in the movie, the mother. She's really kind of different and surprising. Can you talk about how you created that character, what your thinking was?
Sure. There was a slightly simpler version of the story when I first pitched it, which is that Hiccup is being tasked with taking over as chief of the tribe, stepping into his father's shoes, but feeling very uncomfortable with that because he knows that he's not a carbon copy of his father. And there's something out there, and it's itching at him this discovery yet to be made that's going to define who he is. So when he discovers that his mother's not only alive, but like Diane Fossey or Jane Goodall, kind of living among dragons in this very dragon-centric world, full of purpose and none of the rules that he's bound to, just absolute kind of freedom, but a very immersive dragon world. That's where he's like, oh, of course, here's the other half of my soul. This is why I've never felt at home back at Berk. And so she was meant to represent everything that he longed for, but also fundamentally, at her core, believe in segregating the dragons to protect them, whereas he's all about coexistence. So that became the real her journey through the story, but also the reason for the conflict after feeling like the victory of having found his identity. And she was, in the first drafts of the story, she was the villain of the story. She was the sympathetic villain because they were both fighting to protect dragons, but she firmly believed that Hiccup's approach of trying to integrate them with humans was only going to lead to disaster and the capture of all dragons. And Drago Bloodvis, the Jaimon Hunzu character, didn't enter the story until the third installment. You heard about him and you felt his approach, but ultimately the third act was about Mother trying to extract the dragons from Berk and Hiccup trying to stop her, which we discovered very quickly that it just wasn't going to sit well with our audience, like kids turning to their parents and saying, why is Hiccup fighting his mom, and why is his mom taking away the dragons? Like a little too mature for, I think, the broad audience that we were aiming for. And also kind of, it just made her irredeemable. So while trying to keep her flawed, we were trying to find ways of kind of lightening the load on her as well, and feeling like she had genuine remorse, and she had realizing that Hiccup was just like her all of these 20 years later, and that she didn't have to stay away from home, that home could be converted in a way, the minds of the Vikings could be converted, as exemplified by Hiccup. That becomes a big revelation that kind of leads her to hopefully a genuine moment of apology that you forgive her for.
That's interesting. So she actually became more nuanced because of your test, because you were showing audiences the film, which is sort of, sometimes you don't think that that's what happens. You show an audience a film and you think it gets more simple somehow.
Yeah, I definitely, there were two primary issues we were testing with the audience. One was whether or not people could forgive Toothless for having delivered the blast that killed Stoic. And the other was, can they forgive this mother even though she's been essentially absent, most of his life, and to a certain amount of her own will, She was taken away, but she could have returned, and why did she stay away? And it was kind of, there were sliding scales, we had to be very careful with the delivery. But luckily, and I'm really happy that we were able to defend the moment where Toothless actually kills Stoic, because it was the ultimate breaking apart of that relationship. Not only was Toothless taken, but he was turned into a weapon against the hero of the entire franchise.
Right.
And so these two being wrenched apart and having that relationship be so broken was something I believed in strongly. But it wasn't until the audience said that they felt bad for Toothless and they couldn't wait for them to get back together, Hiccup and Toothless, that we felt like we'd finally gotten over that hurdle.
Right. Has anyone else found audience feedback to be particularly helpful when you're working on a film? What about you, Chris?
Like always. When the audience is fidgeting and they're uncomfortable in their seats, that you're not engaging them, and engagement is obviously the thing you're going for the most. And even in early stages, when you're doing an animatic, which is a really difficult thing for people to watch, because in black and white, these scratchy drawings, sometimes it's not 100% clear. There's none of the charm of the animation or the pretty colors to like trick you into following. So you're laying it naked and bare in front of an audience, and so, but it's a really wonderful but brutal tool, because you can see exactly what's working, and if it's working, then it's going to be great when it's all finished. And if it's not working, you really got to roll up your sleeves. And so we show all of our things as much as we possibly can, because the audience really ends up being the king of the movie, more than the director.
Was there anything that you changed as a result of audience feedback?
The whole movie was changed 2 times over. Our very first version of the movie was a much more cerebral, almost like a college thesis about creativity and the nature of play, and it was pretty light on real emotions, right? It was, there's all these like things that we thought were important themes, and we thought we were doing something really special, but they just were bored and not engaged when we would show it, and it was clear that we had like a fundamental problem with what we thought was the emotional story, and so we tore the whole thing apart and started over again. And that's pretty common in animation, actually, is that one of the benefits of being able to see the movie before you make it is that you know where it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And
What was that day like, though, when you showed that?
it was so sad. It's so sad. You're hoping that you have a way to fix it in a way that allows you to keep making the movie, because most of these movies, they have at least one or two crash and burn moments where you're like, you're lucky if it's like, oh, the second act isn't working. At least we've got 2 acts that are working. That's the problem, is you just have to, that's part of the process, and you have to trust the process, as they say.
Yeah, your failures are very public.
Yeah.
At least internally at the studio, to the people you're showing it to. And that's by design, and nobody, at Disney anyway, nobody expects us to get it right at the first try. In fact, if we did, I think it'd be really weird. I think everybody would be like, "Whoa, no, that's something's afoot here," because you almost have to have a scientific approach to it. I know it sounds weird for a creative thing, but you almost have to. I always call it passionate detachment. You got to be so passionate about your story, and you got to love it, like it's the most important thing to you. But then detach when you screen it and get feedback, so that you're not emotionally devastated by open and honest feedback, because that's what it's there for. And it is almost like you have to look at it like story development over the course of time. So there's going to be the crashes and burns, and that's part of it. You're just road testing something that you're honing, you're crafting. Test screenings are good, especially later in the game, because you've screened it internally. And for that very reason we brought up earlier, where you're trying to protect things. Something that was funny in screening 1, by screening 7 may not be funny anymore internally. But if you show it to a fresh audience and it gets a laugh, it reminds you like, oh yeah, I forgot. So it helps to kind of preserve. Not only does it help to tell you when you're off track or if things are unclear, but it also helps preserve moments that you may have kind of gotten tired of at some point.
How cognizant are you of your international audience versus your domestic audience?
Not very.
I mean,
I know they're out. I know they're out there.
I asked you specifically, John, because your movie,
international audience.
your movie has this fictional mashup location that's very Japan-inspired. So how much are you thinking about, will people in Japan be looking at this in a very different way from American audiences?
Not a lot, and because I think that can kind of get in your head and mess with you a little bit. And I think you just got to think of the audience in general, and especially with our movies, we don't do the niche audience thing where we're tasked with making a broad audience movie, which means everybody. So, and if you stick to those universal themes that everybody, no matter what culture or wherever they're from, can relate to, that's more your guidepost. But we never really think too much about at all actually about the marketing or even how the differences in audiences, because we feel like if you can keep the themes as relevant as sort of universal themes, like in Big Hero, the main thematic is a kid dealing with loss. Well, I mean, everybody goes through that. That's a very universal human rite of passage that we all kind of go through, and so as long as you are thematically relevant to something that is true to all human beings, then that's a good guidepost. But to think it's too hard, because I don't know those markets that well, So I can only come from the perspective of the dumb American. So.
I mean, I was terrified of American audiences.
Yeah, how come?
What are they gonna? Is this too Latin American, too Mexican? Is this too foreign to them? Like, how do I convince them to come eat at this restaurant when they're used to eating at that other big restaurant?
Right.
And sort of that idea. I also felt the weight of Mexico. I felt like as Guillermo, again, doing all this tough love on me, every meeting he would end by him saying, "Okay, Jorge, just just remember you have the weight of our whole culture on you.
Did you make any modifications to either reach out more to one audience or another?
absolutely. I mean, for us, voice casting was the way to say, even though this movie takes place in Mexico, it's a story for everybody. It's a universal story. Same thing with the music. You know, the songs from Radiohead and Mumford & Sons and all these songs in the movie. And to me, you know, people said, oh, did they force you to use those songs? No, those are songs that I love. And like there's an Elvis song in there that my grandparents loved. You know, there's songs my parents loved. These are all the songs that I grew up as a Mexican listening to. If you have the U.S. next to you, you're obviously going to be influenced and hear all these things. And to me, there's nothing more Mexican than taking things from some other culture and making it your own. So that was kind of the theme of the movie. Like, even though this is really Mexican, really cannot be more authentic, like you said, it's a universal story and it is for everybody. I think my fear also was, you know, as a Mexican and as someone who has that very special and specific relationship with death that Mexicans have, how do you convince people that are normally afraid of it and fear it and no one won't even talk about it to come see a kids movie that kind of is about it? And which that to me was the biggest hurdle. And it was impossible because I had to try to put myself in, you know, what would a non-Mexican think when they saw a main character of a movie die to go to the one he loves. Like, those are just really big things that I don't think in the beginning, I just assumed everybody thought like me. And then realized, oh, no, you know, people in the U.S., they see Of the Dead, they think zombies, they think depressing, they think scary, horror, like, no one thinks when they read the word death, oh, loving, like a tribute, an honorable thing to someone else. So that took a lot of like trying to figure out how do we not scare, you know, soccer moms.
You also have this really funny moment in the movie where there's this little goth boy character at the museum who says, "What is it with Mexicans and death?" And he's a goth, right? I mean, what was the thinking in putting that line in there?
All those we were basically telling the audience exactly what they were thinking, right? We have a line in there also where a kid says, "What kind of story is this? We're just kids." Where it's basically that, like, hold on, we know what we're doing.
Right.
Trust us, it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go.
But it was smart because, again, it did what you wanted it to do, which is to, you know, let everybody know that the filmmakers are aware of what you're thinking right now, and it's also funny.
And those were, you know, all improv jokes. Because we had meetings and people would literally say those lines in the meetings. And we're like, that's good in the script.
Graham, how aware were you guys of the age of your audience as you were working on your film?
You know, again, because of the unique situation of the studio, so far, I feel like all 3 films that I've worked on up there, not a lot of focus testing. We kind of make the movies for ourselves and for our children and kind of go from there. So opening night's kind of terrifying because I don't feel like we have a lot of the homework done going into it. You don't know what the reactions are going to be. And we know up front that everything we make up there tends to feel weird to everyone else. So you just never know how the reactions are going to be. And it's funny thinking, like, you know, the international side of it. I mean, again, I don't know many American studios that would have allowed us to have pretty much cast in almost all English, you know, voice casting. And we weren't sure how that was going to play with a lot of American audiences. And we've got so many people from Great Britain working in the studio that are constantly telling Tony and I, you know, I don't think they'd say that, and you should change this word here and there. And it's kind of funny to me that, you know, we made Paranorman, directed by 2 English guys. So this was kind of our revenge. We got to make an English movie directed by an American and a Canadian. I think the most intense debate we had as far as international dilemmas go on the movie was what to put on the label of Herbert's box at the end, his jelly box. Because unbeknownst to Tony and I, jelly means something totally different in England than it does in America. And so the graphic that we wanted to put on originally was going to be like a jam jar, but to English folks, jelly means like jello, like gelatin. And so there was like, we ultimately just did a spoon with some sort of nondescript stuff on it because we had to sort of balance it out and make sure the Americans and the English folks felt equally represented in it. But yeah, it's just always, every day is like unforeseen things that show up that you just never predict in the whole process. Again, first time out, I don't know how you felt, Jorge, but every day I walked into the office, it was always the same feeling in my stomach of like having to write an exam that there was no way to study for it. Like no matter how much prep you did, you knew somebody was going to throw something at you at some point during the day that you're going to be on the spot to just figure it out and move on. And there's just no way to prep for it no matter what.
And you can't be like, this moment's for the kids, and this moment's for the adults, and this moment's for France, and this moment's for Japan. Like you'll be, that'd be a weird way to make a movie. You just have to make it for yourself, or like if you have a partner like I do, and you do, you know, I'm writing stuff to try and make him laugh or try and get him to like it, so that it makes the process faster, you know. And so, if you start thinking about what, you know, this is a moment that's crafted for a kid, and this is a moment this is a joke for the parents, so they don't get bored. Then it's all over. So luckily, our sense of humor is juvenile enough that kids seem to like it as well. But we don't ever really consider that stuff. I mean, if you think about, you know, I always talk about The Incredibles, where he works in an insurance office, and it's like trying to get past red tape, and like what kid understands what that is? But you know that you can see that he's depressed and sad, not doing what he wants to do.
I take the same approach too. I find it really dangerous to try to second guess an audience, and when people start talking about, you know, international appeal or kid appeal or mom appeal, like I don't know what that is so much, but sometimes the feedback is a certain sequence might be really romantic or touching or poignant on a mature level. So hey, is there anything we can put in there that will keep kids from stirring in their seats at the same time? And I get that note. It's like, sure, you know, we got dragons. We can have them doing something in the background that if the younger portion of the audience is tuning out to what's happening, then there's something for them to respond to. But it's not a guide so much as just, hey, let's make the movie we want to see. And I think we on the crew keep each other honest in that way.
We're all our first audience, you know, so you do have to make it for yourself first, and because you're the first responder, you're going to be responding to that material in some way, you know, for the first time, and hopefully then you crafted it in such a way that the audience will respond in a similar way.
How much are you drawing yourself when you're working on a movie? Don, do you find yourself using that as a tool to communicate?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely, all the time. I mean, not as much as I'd like. I mean, I think a lot of us came from story and character design, so we were drawing a lot, and so that goes away when you get in the directing ranks, you know, to some extent. But yeah, you always have we haven't found a way to electronic-ize it yet, modernize it yet. But Chris and I would have story pads, and even in animation dailies, while we had Mark Henn at a Cintiq who would actually go over the actual animation, we were constantly being like, what if you did this expression, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely a great tool, I think, for directors to be able to just cut through the verbal communication and have a picture. It just speaks a little. We all speak that language, I think. Being in animation, I think we're all kind of visual folks. So yeah, definitely drew quite a bit.
Graham, what about you? Did you find that you?
Not as much as I would have liked. The same thing. And I know for me, stepping into the role, it's, you know, described it as being a guy really good at making paper airplanes when I was in the story department to suddenly finding yourself at the controls of a 747. I mean, it's like a huge leap in the amount of decisions and recognizing how much the movie evolves past that animatic. Again, coming from story, you just have it in your head that once that story reel kind of gets tightened up and it's all working, that's the movie. You guys just execute what we created and we'll be fine. And, you know, there's just so much more beyond that. I mean, I knew there were certain things that got tweaked, but I never recognized the scale of how much, like, you know, you're saying, Jorge, day to day, like, just stuff is like, oh, I guess that's how we're doing it then. We'll just make that decision now and move on. And I remember when I stepped into the role having a meeting with Travis before doing it, and I'd been head of story on the project at that point, and I've been doing a lot of boarding, and Travis was like, so you're going to keep on, you know, boarding when you can? And I was like, oh yeah, definitely. Within 2 weeks, I was like, I'm never boarding again. Because it's all just quick doodles on you know, lined paper or discussing things. And I think one of the hardest, most difficult things for me personally was, again, being a very visual person. I just realized I work out everything through thumbnails and drawings. And suddenly I was in this role where that wasn't really an option as much. I mean, it certainly helped when you had enough time and enough forethought to get a doodle or two down to help quantify what needed to happen. But I suddenly had to talk. I just had to talk. I had to articulate things way more than I ever did before. I used to be able to just go away for a couple of days and draw it all out and then point at it and let people figure it out. But suddenly you're on the spot every day, having to find ways to articulate through your voice what needs to happen or to help everybody keep moving. It's terrifying.
But sometimes it's faster still to draw. Like you're like an animation review, and you're like, the expression is just a little bit, and it's impossible to describe, and so you can just do a little.
Yeah, you get in those
doodle.
moments where everybody starts talking in that spiral, and you're like, this is not going there. Give me some paper, and
Yeah, that's it's still a good shortcut for that type of stuff. But again, other than thumbnail chicken scratches and a few like expression things, and it's hard to have time to do the drawing.
Yeah, you don't get a chance to sort of finesse the lighting and how you want it.
And when you bring up going back to your office and closing the door and just being immersed into a scene, it's like, oh, those days. I remember those days because you just, again, don't have that luxury to go back.
Well, yeah, what about that? I mean, we live in a world where there are constant distractions. In addition to all the people interrupting you to ask you questions about your movie, there's phones and TV screens everywhere. I mean, how do you, when you really need to just have some quiet thinking time, how do you get it?
Stay at the office really late till everybody leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, weekends.
Yeah.
Or like I would put my son to sleep and then work till 2 or 3, and that was like my golden time.
It does help you compartmentalize, especially with kids. You can get very focused with your time. Whereas before, the muse would somehow strike you, and a little bit. You could be a little more relying on the muse to strike. You don't have that luxury, especially when you have kids. And when you go into directing, it's like, no, you've got this window to figure this out, and so you got to be very focused with your sort of problems.
What's that Picasso quote? Inspiration exists, but it better find you working. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, well, you feel like a doctor on call where you have to learn how to sleep standing up in a closet for 20 minutes so that you can find that little nugget of time. It's really hard to do creative stuff without that time that you can, talk about nothing, joke around for 20 minutes, and then get into the creativity. If you only have 40 minutes, you're like, oh, okay, well, we better solve this right now, and it's pretty impossible.
Well, and you had this crazy experience of directing this movie at the same time that you were directing 22 Jump Street, right?
Yes.
How does that work?
It does not work very well. Luckily, by the time we were shooting that movie, we had finished the layout and we were just reviewing animation and lighting dailies, but that still was, 2 to 3 hours of the day after the end of a 12 to 13 hour day shoot. Luckily, with the time change difference between New Orleans and Australia, they were just getting going. They're just getting going as I was getting home at 11 at night going, okay, we'll have our conference call at midnight, and then it was pretty brutal.
How long did that go on for?
That went on for our entire shoot. And I left the last day of shooting 22 Jump Street to fly back to start the mix.
Oh my God.
Wow.
It was.
So you never thought to divide and conquer? Like,
That's just not
Phil,
the
you
way-
take the live action movie today, I'll handle animation.
No, I mean, sometimes, very rarely, we would be like, I honestly can't stay awake for this call. I'm just looking at it on my iPad really fast as we're driving home, and I'll tell you my loose thoughts, and you have to deal with it today because I can't. It happened a couple times, but we are a very inefficient team.
Well, that kind of brings me to my last question, which is when you're doing something so consuming as directing an animated movie, how do you find a work-life balance? How do that work?
Don't. Just don't.
Is anybody gotten...
I found for me, it was work with your wife. That way she can't complain that she doesn't see you.
And she designs all your
And
female
she
characters,
designs all the
right?
female characters. Anytime I write, she's the first person that reads it. I mean, she's completely involved with everything, and so I make it. I always tell her, like, this is the struggle that we're both gonna go through. I'm gonna get blamed for all the bad stuff, but you're gonna be right in there with me. So I involve my son too. I mean, so I feel like we're gypsies, and so you got to join me on this quest. We're gonna all go together, and if I just separate, then I'm gonna suffer, and you guys are gonna suffer. So we might as well suffer together.
So do you like hammer out story issues at the breakfast table or anything?
all
You
the
do?
time. So you know how people say like you turn it off. I mean, I live and breathe this stuff, so this is my life, and I love it so much. You know, when people say, "Oh, you need a hobby," it's like this is my hobby. So I made work and family the same. That's how I did it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, really.
Did anybody else have any other ways they've made it work for them?
I mean, you know, you just, like you said, you just recognize when those windows are time for, you know, with the kids, and to some extent try to involve, you know, family when I had to work on the weekend or whatever. You know, my little 6-year-old son James would come in for a bit and hang out, and you just try to integrate as best as you can and make the most of those moments. I feel like the one sort of private time thing that I tried to protect for myself, for my own sanity, it falls into the Canadian stereotype, I guess, but I still managed to go out once a week, late night, to play in my like adult beer league, hockey league. And I felt like that was always that 1 hour of time where like everything just went away for a little while, and wherever you can find those little moments to just give yourself a release from it, you do step back into it that much more refreshed. But it is such a tricky balance. I'd never anticipated how all-consuming it was going to be. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of deferred, you know, like vacations and like once the movie's over, we'll do this. And so I'm starting to deal with some of those promises evidently I made in moments of duress, where like, wait, what? We're going to Iceland? Okay, we're going to Iceland. Yeah, there's a lot of it's hard. And I will say though, you know, because my son saw it for the first time at the premiere, and if anybody had any reason to resent the movie, because and they were very vocal about it. You know, they let me know that I was never around, and so I turned to them at the end of the movie and says, so kind of wincing a little bit, you know, right? What'd you think? And they both were just giggling, and that was awesome, you know. So that kind of made it, you know, worthwhile.
They don't resent Baymax for all the attention you
Oh
got.
no, they love the film. So that really helped ease the pain a little bit.
I bet.
Yeah, I had a lot of support and understanding at home, and also I think on the production side, like our producer Bonnie Arnold, she because I was doing double duty, she would often carve out blocks of days for me to go do rewrites, and that kind of became, you know, a strange sort of break, you know, just to get away from the extremely regimented timetable of the day where, you know, every 15-minute increment is like accounted for. So just to have a little bit of free, even though writing itself is actually a miserable process for me, it was sort of a nice break from kind of that pattern, that very structured pattern.
Well, I feel like I should now release you all into your free time. Thank you guys so much for being here. It was lovely talking with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
A lot of fun.